Well, hello. I'm Lenore Rattray, and this is Stand Up 8, Episode 4. So here we are. It's October 2023, and apparently an entire summer has passed since I last revisited the story of my experience as a victim of crime and a missing person. At least revisit it here in the podcast form. It was a big revisit for me in early July, as it was the first time that I went to the media. And I'm not going to lie, it's had its share of fallout. The whole media coverage experience, letting them into your home, trusting what you said was going to be what you meant, was heavy, to say the least. And as I get deeper into the story and the experience of being missing, it's tough. It gets tougher, especially now, because this is the ugly parts. So I have to ask, what do I really want to share? And what's the point of telling the story now? A number of people have asked, why now? I don't really have an answer that consistently summarizes the rationale, but I guess all in all, the story was coming out of me whether I wanted it to or not. And I guess there's an element of control and empowerment for me in the retelling. Getting my voice out on a national level with the help of CBC at this present time in my life has been incredibly grounding on so many levels. And it's taken a while to get here. I've learned that trauma is complicated. I've learned its impact varies from person to person and can evolve and take shape in different ways, healthy ways, not so healthy ways. It all depends on what's going on in our lives. For me, at least that's how I see it, and that's how it's coming out of me. This is why I keep coming back to the Japanese proverb, Nana Karobi Yaoki, meaning fall down 7 times, stand up 8. It's the inspiration, clearly, for the name of the podcast, and for me, there have been at least 7 big fall downs in my life. The kidnapping was definitely a big one, and it left a decent permanent imprint. But there were other imprints. And that's also part of the story. So what do we do when something knocks us down and we're forced to keep going, to push through? I know what I do. I know what I did. I shut down a lot. But often it still looks like I'm awake. Sound familiar? As I revisited the story, talking to those that are close to me that were impacted directly by me being a missing person, I realized so did they. So let's go back and hear from Detective Stu and maybe my mom and dad and find out, how did they handle it? How did they keep going despite the mystery of the unknown for 9 days?
At the time that this happened, as I'd stated previously, we were at a loss to know, okay, why did this happen? If in fact it happened, right? Why did it happen? There's nothing that points. Nobody's made a ransom demand. There's nothing that's right in our face telling us that this is why Lenore is not where she's supposed to be. Okay, given that, like all cops, I'm a human being. At that particular time, I had a very young family. I was the proud father of 2 little girls. Well, it's impossible not to play what if. What if something like this happened to my little girls? What would I want to do, right? What steps would I take, right? And I had a good deal of empathy. I'd made a relationship, a very loose relationship with both your mom and your father, right? I think probably leaned a little bit closer to your dad than I did to your mom because we're men. But I kind of had a lot of empathy for his position. He was worried sick about what happened to his little girl, right? So that stuff plays on your mind, right?
How old were your kids then?
Well, they would have been 3 and 5, around that. And that year, from the beginning of the year on, I'd been really, really involved in work and had been really taxed with, a lot of hours away from my family, right? So maybe it was a little more acute. The feelings were a little more acute because of that. I don't really know. I guess it makes sense it would have been. But, I mean, I made it a point never to burden my family or try not to burden my family with the issues that rose for me at work, right? Being a policeman charged with investigating really horrendous, crimes against people, you can't burden your family with that stuff, right? So there were very, very few outlets in those days. Your peers, your colleagues, you discussed it with them, right? But that's pretty much where it stopped, and then of course in those days, a lot of the solutions to, or at least what you thought were the solutions, were found, through alcohol and camaraderie, hanging out and having a bunch of beers with your buds, and oh yeah, I feel better now. Now I go home and stew about why I'm not solving this, right?
Well, I don't remember the exact details, but it must have been the Sunday or the Monday. Maybe it was the Monday, because I just remember a knock at the door and a big camera right there. Big camera on my face. The door, and I was shocked. Look, and a microphone stuck under my nose. And a big camera right there, guy following me, and they're asking me questions. I just said, get out of here. I think I said, get out of here. I don't remember what I said, but I was not impressed. And I didn't give them any statements as far as I remember. It was the way they did it, because just right there in my face, And that's when it first happened. And then I shocked when I come back home, they're still there. And then I got more still there. It just really shocked me. Time when I come home, like, they're there. They're just still there. Like, come on. And then they would phone and, they want an interview. But I remember having an interview with a paper because I thought it would help. I thought, well, you're probably watching the papers. If you saw my face in the paper, that you would know that we haven't given up on you. And so that's the only reason. I remember this terrible interview right now. And they said, if Lenore was out there, what would you say? And that was the most horrible. Because I cried. I crumbled on television. And that is so disintegrating. For that to happen, for me, naturally, what would I say? And I said, can't even say it now. And ever since then, when I gave that interview, I just hated them. Because for lack of better words, I said to Fred, feels like I was raped. they raped me emotionally on television. And that's how I felt.
Yeah, they had nothing. They had nothing. They told me they had nothing. And Stu was just trying to be a friend and help me through it at the time. Because nobody had nothing. Nobody knew anything. Nobody had nothing. There was just nothing to grasp a hold of and any leads to follow. I spent my time driving around the city, and that was fruitless. At least I thought so. Debbie went to see a psychic she knew, apparently, and that psychic said you were by a stream or river in the forest somewhere. You were cold and in the forest, but you were all right. That's probably why I thought I should go walking in the forest, but it seemed as though I never really had time or the energy to do it. And I wish I would have. Maybe I would have come across you guys, and it'd be the end of him.
Okay, let's be real. My dad is not a violent man. The even keel, low voice you hear here is pretty standard talk for my dad, if he even talks at all. The best descriptive word for him that comes to mind is stoic. And don't get me wrong, I've seen my dad blow 1, 2, maybe 3 times in my life, and one of them was with a .22 caliber gun in his hand, wanting to end the life of a dog that had gone completely mad and bit me at a birthday party when we lived in the country. My birthday party. When we become parents, protecting our babies at all costs becomes an instant instinctual reaction to any threat. At least that's how I see it. And as a parent now, I get it. I know. But I often still get asked, how did I survive? And I guess that is at the root of this podcast. Life is complicated. Camp Hell was my ultimate test of survival. I will never get rid of those memories. But also, life continues to form around them, which makes me often wonder, how do we possibly survive all that we do in life? So far in the past episodes, I've looked at naivety, compliance, and adaptability as factors that contributed to keeping me alive, that saved me. In this episode, I want to focus on the state of shutting down. On that particular July 4th, 31 years ago, my trauma storage banks, for lack of a better term, were overloaded and overflowing. This was the first full day of captivity. I can still see it, feel it, smell it. I mean, where the hell was I? Why couldn't I go home? Who the fuck is this disgusting slime shit pile of perversity forcing me to stay here? And would he please stop touching me, poking me, saying fucked up things to me and hurting me? Of course, I never said any of these things out loud. What I did actually say out loud to him was, I'm a good girl. I did everything you said, and I just want to go home. I guess this was an attempt to make him like me, to see me as a human with feelings, to spare me, to maybe magically wake up and say, oh my God, I never thought of it that way, but you're right. What I am doing is not okay. Let's get you home where you belong. But my words had no impact on him whatsoever. I had to find another way. As far as he was concerned in that moment, life was great. He was in control. And from what I saw, he had found a new toy to play with. His repetitive comment of, "It's not up to you anymore," sunk my soul. So, how did I get through this then? And really, how do you possibly carry it and continue now? Today, 30 plus years later, I am a parent. I have a daughter. My eyes are open to what my parents must have experienced. I can't even imagine functioning in my day-to-day life when carrying this kind of worry. What if my child was gone and no one had any idea where she was? Why I have never thought to ask my parents about how they felt until now is odd, I guess, but on the other hand, understandable. It's what we do. We keep moving forward. I mean, really, could you just sit there and watch a newscast about your missing child while sitting helplessly and hoping for a miracle? One teensy tiny clue? It's not like the movies. No, I couldn't. In my mom's experience, she shut right down. She just functioned without thinking. It was automatic. It had to be. Her go-to sanity saver was the ability to meditate and sleep. It worked. It kept her going. On the other hand, my dad and Detective Stu formed a friendship. Their common connection was that they both were raising daughters, and finding me was their job, despite the fact that not one tactile or viable clue was leading them in any sort of direction. And my job out there was to just find a way to stay alive so I could see them all again, so I could go home. So in telling this, I'm learning a lot about 21-year-old me. I'm seeing even more so what she has to teach me now, and vice versa. There's a motivational saying that goes something like, "We're stronger than we know," and to that I gotta say, really? Are we really? Or are we just pretending? Is that the power that shutting down gives us? Something to think about as we go back to the story. To July 4th at 21-year-old me on day 2. Trigger warning, this is true crime and the impact of true crime. This story is about a robbery and a sexual assault. This is about living through and surviving those crimes, and the details may be triggering for some people. July 4th, 1992 is a day, I suppose, in the police records known as Day 2. Although, according to the police, on Day 2, I technically wasn't yet considered a missing person. I believe the policy is to wait 3 days until opening an investigation, just to be sure. However, as you heard, my mom was having none of that. On the morning of Day 2, it was a Saturday, I woke up and I felt him beside me. He was shuffling slightly, adjusting his clothing, digging in a plastic bag. His breath was quick. I could tell he was awake. I did my very best to remain stone still. I just needed to stall. I was lying on my right side, back facing him with my hands bound at the wrists tucked as best I could beside my face. All of my clothing was stripped away. A blue, slimy sleeping bag was tucked and zipped around me. He made sure that. I felt him through the night, waking to check that I was tucked in tight. After, of course, he also checked to ensure that my ankles, and my wrists were still bound. It was now light out. I still remained completely still. My entire being was flooded with fear. I was vibing. I think it was then that I started to count, to cope. I counted seconds, which turned into minutes. I began to tally those minutes in my head. My counting became my clock, my connection to reality. I still had on my watch, but my wrists were tied and there was no way to see it. I imagined, I guess, by looking around, it was probably around 8 in the morning. He pulled my shoulder, forcing me to face him, and started making demands on my belly, was his initial instruction, always. And instantly his hands were all over me. I stayed silent. I kept counting. He prattled on in a disgusting way as he touched, tugged, poked, twisted, pulled, and forced my body into places I would never want to go again. He was in a totally different world. This shit-smelling, garbage-strewn, wooded squatter's paradise had become his perverse playland. And no, I'm purposely not going into specific details, because honestly, just why? What I will say is that today, right now, I can still hear every single twisted word. I hear it, I feel it. Arguably almost as shocking as it was the first time it was said. I feel the violation of what exited his rotting pit of a mouth, possibly just as much, if not more, than what he did physically, if that makes any sense. Now, to give you a bit of backstory, at the age of 21, I wasn't a virgin. I'd been in 2 what I considered long-term relationships between the ages of 15 and 21. I was faithful, and both of my boyfriends were over the age of 18. Prior to this, though, at a much younger age, I had also been forcibly introduced to pornography. I was not innocent to all that porn entailed yet. I was. In what I believe now to be an attempt to heal myself from those earlier days, that earlier experience, I had been the only student in my grade 9 social studies class who chose pornography as the topic of my year-long research project, a project that I had to present and also was 40% of my grade. We didn't have an internet then, so I found what I could through local library resources, and my mom, who fittingly was going to university herself, took me to the library at the University of Calgary, and I watched a pretty real and grisly documentary called Not a Love Story. And this was from a perspective of the 80s. My 14-year-old eyes were opened wide. In those first shocking days of captivity, my very first thoughts were also, this man has never been loving and intimate with anyone. As I mentioned earlier, the story he'd given me at this point was that he just escaped from prison. He had 1 gun that he used to rob me, and after the fight the night before, he showed me 2 more to prove how much he could hurt me if he wanted to. He told me many, many times, "Yes, sirree," he said, "if the guys in prison could see him now." "How many other women have you done this to?" I asked. "None. he replied. Then why me? I asked. Why corrupt someone? Don't you know that this is wrong? You're getting a chance at a second life. Why endanger someone's future? I was pulling out my negotiating vest. But then he just repeated, I'm not going back to prison. And besides, I haven't had a woman in 2 years. I'd be stupid to let a young blonde built like you go away without having you. Prison changes you, he said. I wasn't a criminal before, but prison makes you into one. This isn't up to you anymore. I still pushed on. Last night you said you were going to bring me somewhere so you could get some stuff. Then you're going to let me go home. I was still attempting to appeal to his possible human side. He had started to clean the camp up now. Everything was in disarray from the fight the night before. One of the 3 guns he had shown me was missing, as was one of the lenses in his glasses. He muttered over and over that he better be able to find it. He didn't want to stand out and attract attention from the police. A missing lens and the fresh sizable gouge that I had put in his face were concerning him, and yes, as an aside, it really still does please me that I caused him to bleed. Anyway, he found the lens and the gun. Thank God. And then he hogtied and gagged me and went to get something to eat. I didn't know, though, at that point that he'd gone to do some shopping. I knew he left. I knew there was a Safeway across from us on the other side of the highway, but we hadn't had discussions at that point as to what we were doing or what he was doing. He just left. After ensuring, of course, that I couldn't move and I was gagged, so I couldn't scream. With my hands behind my back, I could only guess at the time. I thought it was around maybe 9. I continued counting the time, second by second, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. All I could do was listen. A piece of black cloth was a makeshift blindfold, and the hum of the traffic was louder. It was Saturday, after all, and a long weekend. The ferries would be busy, and this was their main route for traffic. For the possibly thousands of people that would pass by that day, not one would have a clue that just 10 feet into the bush was a girl in the fight for her life. Only a grassy hill separated us from the highway. I couldn't let myself even imagine the reality of my situation, though. I just kept thinking, he said he'd let me go tonight. He said he'd let me go. He said he has a plan. Soon enough, I heard the rustling of trees and crunching of footsteps, followed by someone pulling on my bindings. Good, he muttered. He chattered, dare I say, happily, while untying me. It was still a bit chilly, so he let me sit up, and being the nice fella that he was, excitedly showed me he had brought us food. Macaroni salad, Yoplait yogurt cups, orange juice, and chocolate milk, and, for fun, 5 packs of Hubba Bubba bubble gum. I said I wasn't hungry. I did have some gum, though. The chewing fell in step with the counting. 12 minutes went by, 15 minutes, 23 minutes, and so on. As I chewed the gum, chunks of what I thought were little rocks kept getting stuck, and I had to creatively either spit them out or swallow them. He was just sitting there staring out at the trees, silently eating his yogurt and salad. I didn't want to disturb this moment. I was learning to embrace the times when he wasn't touching me. My hands were free now, and I quickly felt the side of my head, the left side in particular, was swollen, rippled, lumpy. The right side was just as swollen, and I could feel an egg-sized lump on my temple. Oddly, I wasn't in a lot of pain. The right side of my jaw ached, and my teeth wouldn't bite down on the right side, but I still kept chewing. I would also learn later that the rocks that I was spitting out were pieces of my teeth. He was oblivious to it all, to any pain I might be feeling, and we just sat, saying very little, staring, watching the trees, the sky, the clouds above. At one point, he brought out his 3 guns, unloaded them, cleaned them, reloaded them, right in front of me on the AstroTurf. I could have reached out and grabbed them, maybe, but that, I figured, was a risk I wasn't ready for. He watched me out of the corner of his eye as he worked. He was always watching, all while vividly chatting and describing the size of the holes that comparatively each bullet would make as it entered and exited my body. He seemed to enjoy sharing this expertise with me. He puffed up as he spoke. As the day progressed, he would switch between torture mode and inquisitive mode without warning. He liked to stop and talk. It was like he timed it, though. He always looked at his watch before and after. He had a lot of questions about my past sexual experiences. Those were his only questions, really. My answers were pretty much all lies. It was so obvious that he wanted to be aroused. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of hearing the content, the detail he seemed to be so desperately seeking. I have a lot of scars that aren't visible when dressed. He got a pretty close-up look at them, questioned how I got them, and I told him about the car accident that happened when I was 7. I shared the true story of attempting to catch a school bus and being hit by a car doing 90. I also embellished a lot. I even went as far as to create fictional, I suppose, related to the injuries that I said now prevented me from having a normal life, emphasizing an ability to not have a normal sex life. He listened intently and even seemed to be genuinely intrigued. He asked more questions and seemed to be, dare I say, somewhat oddly sympathetic, which kind of was an aha moment for me. Achieving the sympathetic response was a minor win. I was learning. The rest of the day, we played the waiting game. Well, I mostly did. I was still at the mercy of his random needs to assault and torture me. But then he would stop and switch into a regular person. He had a plan, he said again, and a map to go with the plan. We were apparently in or near a park called Mosquito Creek. He pulled out a map and showed me the trails. He said that once it got dark, he would take me down a rough trail that he was familiar with, and it divided at one part where he would let me go one way and he would go the other way. He said it would probably take me about 10 minutes, but then I could find some houses, get some help, and call my mom. I was holding on to this plan. The sky started to darken, the day got longer, and mostly we didn't talk. We sat, we stared, and waited. It was so boring and so terrifying, all at the same time. I glanced at my watch. It was just around 7:30, just before he started talking again, questioning. And surprise, surprise, he had more sexual questions. Was I experienced doing this? Insert pornographic term here. And what about that? Insert another crude, porn-heavy term there. He was prattling again, just gross, crude prattling. My answers were solid and consistent. No, 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 and no. But he didn't buy it. And off went the switch. The torture came at me full force. My counting in my head got louder. The day got longer. The minutes turned into hours, and at 10:30, he stopped. It was time to go home. I've done it. I thought I made it through. Thank fucking God. He got dressed, said he wanted to check on something. I remained undressed and was again re-hogtied. He asked me how to pronounce my name and then said, "My name is David. I might as well tell you now. The cops are going to tell you anyway." Something wasn't right, I sensed, even more so than all of the other things that were clearly not right at all in any way, shape, or form. 5 minutes passed, and then once again I heard the familiar rustling of leaves and crunching of branches as he returned. He placed his hand on my shoulder. "Lenore, I've made a decision. I decided to keep you one more day." Terror enveloped my whole being, and accordingly, off went my switch. This was officially the beginning of my shutdown.